Hello and welcome to the Week in Nintendo here on Good Vibes Gaming. This is episode 5, and this week in Nintendo we'll be discussing the latest Zelda Echoes of Wisdom trailer, the next Splatfest, as well as the evolving landscape in games media. I'm your host, Steve Bowling, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Brandon Miracle.
Hi, everybody.
It's been a busy week. But before we dive into the news, Brandon, I want to know, what have you been playing this week?
So we've got The Legend of Zelda coming out next month, and that has inspired me to go back and play the Link's Awakening remake on Switch. I actually just started it last night. I've only played for maybe like 3 hours so far, but I loved it the first time I played it. I loved the Game Boy original. I've never even played the DX version, actually. But yeah, it's nice to go back to this game. I never remembered feeling as negatively on it as a lot of people did in terms of performance, but it's definitely noticeable for me now. Like, going from area to areas where it gets like bad, but then it quickly levels out and it's just kind of fine after that. I think maybe that's why I wasn't so down on it in general, because it didn't really affect the more important parts of gameplay. But it is annoying. I will say that.
Yeah, I haven't revisited Link's Awakening since I originally played it. The issues with it didn't hamper my enjoyment of it in any way. I still really love that game. It's got one of the best aesthetics on the Switch, so I'm really happy to see that come back for Echoes of Wisdom. I'm hoping that Nintendo has figured out, or Grezzo has figured out, how to iron out some of those performance hiccups, because Echoes of Wisdom seems to be an order of magnitude more complex, mechanically speaking, than Link's Awakening. It has, with the echoes and kind of the non-linearity of the game, there's potential to create some additional performance issues. But Zelda is a bit far in the future for me. This week, I've been focused on what's coming out this month, as we've discussed previously on the podcast. Emio comes out at the end of this month. We're in August now. And I'm preparing for that alongside members of our Winner's Circle. If you don't know, you can join our Winner's Circle over at patreon.com/gvgaming, where you can, for as little as $5 a month, get episodes of this podcast a day early, as well as have access to any of our live streams and stuff like that, where you can chat and interact with us during those. But I've been playing the Famicom Detective Club remakes again. Ash and I reviewed them on the channel, but given that Emio is the third in this series, or the way they're wrapping it up, I felt like it would be a good time for me to go back and revisit these games to refamiliarize myself with the story of them. And, we leveled some criticism at these games in the previous episode, and that criticism stands up. Mm-hmm. It is definitely a bit obtuse at points, and I'm trying to play through solely off memory without any guides, and I'm still having trouble. There are puzzles that I remember and some that I don't, and I think it's because those solutions are so kind of out there. But if you strip away those criticisms, these are still really solid visual novels with really engaging mysteries and stories to them, and I'm really excited to see kind of how these characters evolve in the upcoming third chapter.
Yeah, I've been playing them myself. I'm still making my way through The Girl Who Stands Behind. I want to say I'm like 60, maybe 70% of the way through the story. I've been going at it pretty slowly, because at least in the case of The Girl Who Stands Behind, it takes about 5 chapters for that plot to start doing anything.
Yeah.
But it finally started getting to a point where things were happening. I'm starting to understand why people like Ayumi Tachibana so much. I was like, she's not doing anything. It's been 5 chapters. She's just not here. But yeah, I'm starting to see the change on that. So I'm excited to dig even deeper, and then move into The Missing Heir, and see what that game's all about.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. it's a slow burn in some of those games. The story can take a while, but once it picks up steam and things start to unravel, it becomes really gripping, and you get really stuck into it. That said, I do share your excitement for Zelda. I'm super hyped for Echoes of Wisdom. Big shout out to my sister. She saw that I was complaining about wanting to buy the special edition Switch Lite, and she just picked it up for me as like a early birthday gift or a late birthday gift, given when it comes out. So thank you. I'm very excited to have that in my collection. But we got a new trailer for this. I know John covered it, but have you watched that trailer yet?
I have. It was very hard not to. I'm typically the kind of guy, specifically in the case of Zelda, where I will watch the initial trailer and then it is media blackout until launch. But I feel like we knew so little about the scope of the game that I was okay just digging in a little deeper and seeing what else is going on. Now, one thing I appreciate as well is that they're not going too hard on plot details, though I surmise that the plot will not be like a massive element of this entry. We're focusing on the gameplay here, which is great because I like what I'm seeing. But I love that we have horses. We have horses, my guy. We're back from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and for the second time ever, we have a horse in a top-down Zelda game. The first being Four Swords Adventures.
Oh wow, I forgot about that. When you said that, I was like, when did we have a horse? And you're right. Four Swords Adventures is long in the rear view for me. I haven't played that in quite a while, but I was also really excited to see this. And I'm like you, I tend to once I've made a purchase decision on a game, I don't really want to see more of it until I play it. That's the reason that I'm pretty late usually to Sparking Zero trailers. Like, I know I want to play that. I don't need to know how many characters are in it because I'm going to buy it. And the surprise is fun, right? But I try to avoid these, but with Zelda, especially in our line of work, that can be a little difficult.
Yeah.
And I watched the trailer, and I watched John's reaction to the trailer where he was pointing out things that I was noticing. Props to John for noticing these in real time, though. That's remarkably difficult. It would have taken me a few playthroughs to find what he found. But I have to say, my favorite moment in that whole trailer, and I'm glad you mentioned the horses, was when Zelda creates an echo of a carrot, and that's how she summons her horse.
It's beautiful. They found just the right way to introduce that mechanic to this game. I love that, despite how separated riding a horse is from the core experience, the way you get your horse is rooted right in the gameplay experience. It's super good.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed as well is that there are various horse designs. So I'm wondering if it is similar to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, where you find and tame a horse, or is it more that you have a horse that you can give different designs or choose what design you want? I'm curious what the case is here. Or maybe when you put down a carrot, you just get whatever you get.
Yeah, and that's a good question. I hope, because it borrows so much seemingly from Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, that duology, which is what I assume we'll be referring to them as years down the road. It borrows so much from them that I have to imagine that you get to name your horse, just because it feels like you'll have some system for like choosing and naming a horse that is your buddy throughout this adventure. At least I hope so. I won't be disappointed if not, because some of the charm of these games is that they are more simplistic, these 2D Zelda games, that they're not as into the weeds in the minutia as the 3D entries in the series. But I would be happy if we got to interact with our horse buddy a little bit more than that. Speaking of designs, however, Zelda's got outfits, and I was so happy to see that be a thing that comes from these most recent 3D entries.
I don't know why this didn't occur to me. Like, this is something most of us probably could have predicted would happen, but it just never crossed my mind. Like, Zelda's got different outfits. It's not as granular as like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Like, rather than, piece by piece, you just wear an entire outfit, which is fine. It's still cool that you can customize Zelda's look. Um, and then there are accessories in addition to that. Were those two different systems? I couldn't quite gauge from the trailer.
I feel like they are. I'm not 100% same as you, but I feel like accessories and outfits are going to be not tied to one another.
That's cool too, because like that gives you a level of customization that you don't get in a 2D Zelda game. So it's nice to see a lot of those elements from the last two entries kind of bleeding over into this game, and that extends even beyond outfits and world design. Quest design is also being lifted from the past entries, where you'll have a series of side quests and main quests that are divided in menu, so that you can sort them, see what you need to do. Just in general, I love having a quest list, because sometimes, you're doing a side quest in like Skyward Sword and you just can't remember the list of things that you have to do. So having that available, super nice. So thank you for that. I don't have a great memory, and I don't want to write everything down all the time.
Well, it's also in a weird way like a nice accessibility feature of sorts, because I can't tell you the number of games that I've had to drop and start over because I just didn't have any good way of tracking where I was at. So if I didn't remember, like if I had to put a game down for a few days or a week or longer, I would come back and realize I was just completely lost. And so I'd have to spend hours looking at guides to try to figure out where in the quest line I was, or more realistically, just trash my save and start a new one. And I just don't have that kind of time these days. So it's nice to know that you can pick this up and just instantly go to a menu and find out, okay, this is what I've got, and here's where I'm at with them. It's a fairly common feature these days, but not one that one would really associate with 2D Zelda. And so it's really nice to have that back.
One thing I've been curious about, and I'm curious what your take on this is, we're seeing all these elements from Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, but the quest design in particular is what it's really caught my eye and has me questioning. What do you think the scope of this game is? How much content is there? How long of a play experience can we expect from Echoes of Wisdom?
Now that's a good question. And I mean, because obviously with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, if you really know what you're doing, like speedrunner level, know what you're doing, that's a 10-minute game. But realistically, in the experience of most people, those big open world Zelda games are probably 40, 50, 60 hours.
Yeah.
If you're talking about the typical playthrough, I'm betting this clocks in at around, I'd say about 20, which to me is a beefy boy for a 2D Zelda game. And I say that because we now have these different quest lines. Like I think in the trailer they showed Zelda had like 4 quests active as the
main quests.
Yeah, main quests, and that's to say nothing of side quests. So I think that you could realistically expect 20 plus hours, especially given that they showed waypoints. So now you can fast travel around. So you don't necessarily have to traverse the whole of Hyrule to get places. So I think the first like 10 hours of that game will be a lot of walking around, opening new waypoints, basically opening up the map. And then that second half of it will be, okay, I've got to go to Kakariko Village. I'm going to warp right there and do what I need to do. Some people will have longer experiences because they'll choose to ride a horse or walk or climb a series of beds or whatever they want to do to get there. And some people, honestly, probably like me, will end up, just using fast travel to get closer to the objective and then figuring it out as they near the end of the game. Because I don't know about you, but as I get closer to the end of a game, the more I want to just see that ending and then go back and clean up the side stuff afterwards.
I'm actually a little different, at least in the case of Zelda. I like to do as much as I possibly can and then close the book on the game with the ending.
Interesting.
It just depends. Like I did that with Tears of the Kingdom. I did as much as I could feasibly do. And then decided, all right, I'm gonna go beat up Ganondorf now.
See, now the thing for me that I think maybe trained me into this weird habit of mine of doing as little as I can and beating a game, and then going back and doing more and beating it again, is the idea that maybe there's like more than one ending hiding out there,
Mhm.
and I want to see both. I don't want to, because it's, if there's a bad ending, I legit want to see it. I want to see the bad ending before I get the good one. So that I can be like, oh, now I don't have to go back to like an earlier save where I have nothing and beat the game again. Because I'm horrible about keeping like earlier saves. I tend to overwrite very quickly. But there was a lot to this game outside of the things we've mentioned too. We've been talking about Zelda this long, and we haven't mentioned that there's like a weird, basic new take on Ultra Hand in this game.
Yeah, it's called, what was it, Bind?
Yes.
So Zelda can bind herself to objects, and then they basically move with her. So you kind of lose the verticality aspect of Ultra Hand. But I don't. This is something that just didn't cross my mind for them to do in a 2D Zelda game. But it makes a lot of sense in this game specifically, given the idea of having all these echoes available to you.
Yeah, and one of the things I liked about this in particular was that Bind went two ways. She could either drag the enemy along with her, or she could let the enemy pull her along. And I thought that was really interesting because they showed, I think it was like a bird that was like flying up to a ledge that Zelda couldn't reach. And so she used Bind on that enemy and had it fly her up there. And then similarly, they had a moment where she grabbed an enemy that she knew she wanted to place elsewhere, move it, and then reverse the bind so that it could move her through an obstacle. And I'm just so consistently impressed with the level of creativity they've achieved within the comparatively restrictive confines of a 2D game.
Yeah, this almost reminds me of that old Breath of the Wild like tech demo they did, where it was entirely in 2D and they used it to kind of experiment with, how fire would interact with grass and some of the other like elements that would then find their way into Breath of the Wild. It feels like that has been realized as a video game.
Yeah, I agree with that. For those of you in the audience who may not know, Nintendo, weirdly, for as opaque as they are as a company, goes to GDC and just brings the goods every year. And one year following the release of Breath of the Wild, they had an entire, TED Talk on how they built the game, and they showed early prototypes that involved recreating the original Legend of Zelda with Breath of the Wild rules. Well, not recreating the original, but basically applying Breath of the Wild's material rules to a 2D Zelda that was visually the same style as the original. And it showed like Link pushing logs into water and setting things on fire, and it was only meant to test out like the physics-based rules of like how different materials interact with each other. But it does feel like they took that concept and brought it completely to fruition in a brand new game.
Yeah, it's very cool that we're getting the kind of expressiveness of the puzzle solving in Breath of the Wild applied to a 2D world, because it doesn't feel like it should work, not in the traditional Zelda style, but they somehow maintained that classic 2D Zelda look, feel, even like world design, and have just, stitched all these things together that seem to work really well.
Yeah, I'm excited to play this game, more so than I've been for a 2D Zelda in quite some time. Not to say that 2D Zelda doesn't excite me, but I think this is the biggest reinvention of 2D Zelda in probably ever. It just takes so much of what we love about the 3D series and injects it into the 2D series. Also, just as a fan of Zelda and somebody who's been covering Nintendo for years and years at this point, I've been saying for a long time that I wanted Zelda to go the Mario route, in that they have these big AAA 3D games and then put out these, comparatively smaller 2D adventures to complement them. And I'm so happy to see that Nintendo is finally doing that here.
I'm curious what the dev cycle for this game is. I'd like to know how long this took. Because it would be great, like you said, to just kind of have a rolling Zelda release schedule where you have these bigger 3D games, these, you know, comparatively smaller 2D experiences, but, with the mechanical depth of the 3D games. I'd love that. Like, I was one of the people kind of expecting a 2D Zelda game to happen this year, but the game we're getting is not at all what I was anticipating. It has blown away my expectations.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's a very interesting time that we're in, and it's so close. We're headed to PAX, and this game will be out not long after that. Remind me, Brandon, is it coming out at the end of this month, or
The
I'm
no-
sorry, at the end of September?
the date that just beamed into my brain was September 26th. I don't know if that's right.
I think that's right. For those of you that don't know, today is also the day that Sony took Astrobot pre-orders, and so I've got two September dates rolling around in my mind right now, and I couldn't remember which is which. But yeah, I believe you're correct. Before we move on from Zelda, though, I do want to put up one last kind of subtopic in relation to the series, because it's something that our contemporaries on YouTube have been talking about, and that is the fact that hidden away in Nintendo's fiscal year results is that Breath of the Wild continues to outsell Tears of the Kingdom. And I was wondering why you think that is, Brandon.
I think Breath of the Wild is just, I mean, its identity is uniquely tied to the Switch, despite also being a Wii U game. Um, Maybe there are people who didn't buy Breath of the Wild who are looking at Tears of the Kingdom and want to play that too, so they're playing Breath of the Wild first. I don't know if there's any one particular right answer here. I look at Tears of the Kingdom; it just eclipsed what 20 million software
Yeah.
sales. That's nothing to sneeze at. It's like it's in the top 10 best selling games on the platform already. I don't know. Some people are looking at this in a negative way, and I don't see it that way. This is a success in every sense of the word.
Right. I think that Tears of the Kingdom, if anything, is more a victim of the fact, and it's hard to call it a victim, but I think that its slower sales momentum is a victim of how late it released in the console's life cycle. Uh, you know, there's kind of an overarching idea in the community now that interest in the Switch is waning, and I have to say it makes sense to a degree. We're nearly 8 years in, but you know, like you said, Breath of the Wild is a Switch launch game, and it's something that is very closely tied to the console. It's the first game most of us play on this thing, and so I think that it kind of enjoys this unique space in which this is the first game you should boot up if you buy a Switch, the very first one. Like when you hold a Switch, if you've never held a Switch and you play Breath of the Wild, you're immediately floored by what the hell is going on that tiny portable device. Same with games like Mario Kart 8 and stuff like that, where it's just there's just kind of this sense of like, how did anybody make something this big on something this small? And I think that Nintendo wisely positioned Breath of the Wild as a launch title. Because it shows off just what the hardware is capable of, and it does so in a way that most games on the Switch do not.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I would not advise most people to play Tears of the Kingdom first. Like, Breath of the Wild enhances the Tears of the Kingdom experience in my book, because the part of Tears of the Kingdom that was so appealing to me from the get-go, even before all the cool stuff with Fuse and Ascend and Ultra Hand, before we even learned about any of that stuff, just the idea of revisiting this expansive world and finding out what happened all these years later and just seeing what changed, that was primarily what I was excited about, was just re-exploring a world and seeing what's different.
I think that's a great way to put it, because Breath of the Wild makes you fall in love with that version of Hyrule and with that Link and that Zelda and all the supporting characters. And Tears of the Kingdom serves as like a second course for that. It gives you more in every respect. You know, you want to explore the sky? Cool. You want to go underground? Cool. You want to go spelunking in caves? Cool. We've got you. It gives you a entirely new context to this world that you already fell in love with previously. And I think that's a huge part of the appeal. So I would never recommend to anybody to play Tears of the Kingdom and not Breath of the Wild. And I'd never recommend anybody to play them out of order. It's one of those things where Breath of the Wild creates a perfect template for you to want to revisit. And Tears of the Kingdom is that second visit. And so I think that's, you know, to me, it doesn't speak to either game being better or worse than the other. It's just people need to have that first experience. I think it's essential to enjoying Tears of the Kingdom the right way. And
it's also only natural that the first game would sell better. I think that's just generally what you see happen with stuff like this. And Zelda's a series that has never particularly sold that well. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are the anomalies.
Yeah, that's true. You know, it's worth remembering that if you go back in the Zelda timeline, like in history, like real world timeline, but you know, Zelda releases, Twilight Princess was directly made as a response to flagging sales of the franchise. Like we got basically a fan service Zelda post Wind Waker because Wind Waker didn't do so hot, which is hilarious in hindsight because now people look at Wind Waker as one of the best Zelda games ever made. But back in 2001 or whatever it was when it came out, it was not a very well-liked game. People were not fans of the art style. There were reactions that Zelda was going too kiddie, and sales reflected that, unfortunately. So, you know, to see these games up in the tens of millions of units sold is no mean feat. Like Nintendo has done really well with this franchise, especially over this generation. So yeah, I don't think it's really an indication that either, you know, that Tears of the Kingdom is an objectively inferior game or that it's not a good game. I think those theories are kind of way off base.
Yeah, like, I mean, just to throw my own personal preference in here, like, I would prefer Tears of the Kingdom 9 times out of 10 to Breath of the Wild. But again, I wouldn't say that if Breath of the Wild didn't exist. It needs to exist for me to feel that way.
Yeah, I think that's a really eloquent way of describing it, because I agree that if I go back and play both games, I have more fun with Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom enables more player creativity. It kind of takes all the best parts of Breath of the Wild and amplifies them. But like you said, you wouldn't recognize those for what they are if you hadn't played Breath of the Wild prior. So, yeah, just an interesting takeaway from that. I think it's just kind of a natural, you know, it's like saying Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition is somehow better than Super because it sold more. But anyway, that's probably enough Zelda for this podcast.
There's never enough Zelda.
Well, that's true. Just wait till September. I'm
You're
sure
right.
people will learn just how much we can talk about Zelda. But we also have yet another Splatfest. I thought, mistakenly apparently, that we were on the final Splatfest for Splatoon 3 because it got announced recently, but we do have one more before then.
Yeah, the final Splatfest is in September because that'll be the second anniversary of Splatoon 3. So we do have one more ahead of time. I'm curious to see what the turnout for this one will be. Because I think just in general, as we get closer to the end of a Splatoon life cycle, just there's an uptick in player count, just in preparation to see it all end. And I say that as if the servers are shutting down, which is not happening. But there is kind of a sense that, oh, Splatoon 3 is coming to an end because the Splatfests are going to be done soon.
Yeah, and this one, I mean, admittedly, it's nothing to write home about. It's what is your favorite carb? There's bread, rice, and pasta. I can't imagine, Brandon, as a diabetic, that you're super thrilled about these choices.
No, but I am Italian.
That's a whole other conflict, isn't it?
That's the perspective I'm approaching this with.
There you go. So definitely a pasta man, I take it.
That's correct.
I'm gonna have to go bread. I'm just a bread guy. I don't know what it is about bread. I just enjoy bread. That's
Bread is part of the Italian family, so
true.
we take up two of the three slots.
That's true. I will say I often pair pasta with bread because I hate myself. But it's it's an interesting penultimate Splatfest. I was digging for that word, if you couldn't tell. And I have to say that this is probably the one where I'm going to play in it just to knock off the rust so that I can perform at my peak at the final Splatfest, because the stakes will be much higher there. The final Splatfests are always interesting to me because obviously we play a hand in deciding the future of the franchise. And I saw some sentiment online, specifically in the comments to a previous episode of this podcast, where folks were saying they were ready for Splatoon to go in a new direction. And I struggled with that comment because I don't know what to make of a new direction for Splatoon, and I'm not sure that it needs one. How do you feel on that?
To me, Splatoon is just kind of what Splatoon is. It's tough. Like if you change the direction too much, do you lose what Splatoon was to begin with? I mean, you could make the same argument for The Legend of Zelda, which made a huge change going into Breath of the Wild. But, at its core, Splatoon is a competitive shooter. Uh, I don't know how much you can mix that up without changing the game, I guess. This is a hard one for me to wrap my head around.
Right. It's an interesting proposition because I don't feel the same way about Splatoon that I do about Smash. And admittedly, I like Splatoon a lot more than I like Smash. Not to say anything, I'm not hating on Smash. You can stop typing that nasty comment. But what I mean when I say that is that I am just more into the competitive nature of Splatoon than I am of Smash Brothers. But Smash Brothers has been with us a whole lot longer, and I see it as it's already reached its ultimate form, quite literally. I mean, Nintendo has even acknowledged it in the title. And so I feel like I can understand people saying that Smash needs to change. But with Splatoon, I feel like there's still room to like do new, interesting things within the genre of a third-person competitive squad-based shooter. They could certainly expand on co-op and make that, something more than what it is. The single-player campaign, could be expanded in ways that honestly I can't even think of yet. But I don't feel like it's tapped for creative potential. I feel like there's still a lot more ways you could take it while still being Splatoon, what we know as Splatoon today at its core. What I find really interesting about the concept of a Splatoon 4 is that, I agree that narratively it could move away from the current structure, but I wouldn't want to see the last seemingly the last like live service shooter that doesn't have a season pass or microtransactions to just go away, because Nintendo has kind of created this island for themselves where I can play a shooter and I don't feel like I need to constantly like give them a little bit more money to keep up with the community.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the approach they took with Splatoon 3, especially with the catalogs. So, like, you had a battle pass that you didn't pay for. You just got rewarded for playing the game. So yeah, it's a nice change of pace from what the rest of the industry is doing. Um, it's very hard for me to see Nintendo just taking Splatoon and doing something radically different with it. And when I say radically different, I mean not being a competitive shooter anymore. Like, to me, that is what Splatoon will be forever. Now, that's not to say that I don't see the potential for like Splatoon spin-offs. I think you could make a cool like rhythm game out of a Splatoon centric kind of thing. Splatoon life sim. Let me rent an apartment in Splatsville and see what life is like. There are different things they could do, but I think the core Splatoon experience, I don't think that should change too much, especially given that this is Nintendo's only shooter. only competitive shooter.
Right. It's a genre that Nintendo typically doesn't play in, and Splatoon has become an established player in the space. And it's something that it's refreshing, it's unique, it's like low pressure compared to most other competitive shooters. I never feel like just a weight on my team when I play because it's just for fun. And that's something I wish more games explored. I love the idea that you can be useful to your team without having to kill other players. Like, you can just be the guy that inks up the turf, and while everybody else keeps the opposing team busy. There's kind of a role for everyone, regardless of your play style, within kind of the core of what Splatoon is. And I think that Nintendo shouldn't move away from that. I think that they should, if anything, lean further into it because they're doing it in a way that's so unique. And it's definitely hitting with people. Splatoon 3 has sold very well. Splatoon is probably the most popular franchise that Nintendo has introduced in the last 15 plus years. So I don't think that we're necessarily ready for a Splatoon, or ready for for lack of a better term, a sea change in Splatoon. I think that it's a good time to just keep doing what works, keep evolving it, keep making it better. There's these little incremental changes between each entry, and I'd just be happy for them to stay the course.
Yeah, I mean, I'd certainly love for them to change some of the more frustrating elements of Splatoon. They did a lot of that with Splatoon 3 in terms of the lobby system, making it easy to play with friends, making it possible to play with friends, being a big one. Um, there's probably some more that they could do with that. I think the stage rotation could still be slimmed down to maybe an hour instead of 2, maybe 3 maps instead of 2. Because it every time I play Splatoon, I end up with the same 2 maps I always have because it just lucks out that way, and I'd like to see that change.
I would love to have a friends only mode where you can just choose your map. Like, if I can get 8 friends together online who want to play, just let us choose the map we're on. Like, let us do a private match where we get to decide the map. And I'd also like 1v1 maps. Like, if I'm playing a 1v1, give me a smaller map.
The private battles already do that, actually. So
really?
That's a thing already. Yep. So you can choose your map, choose your mode. Everything's customizable.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that. Well done, Nintendo. You beat me to it.
You can also do 1v1s in Splatoon online if you want.
Well, I know that, but yeah. I would like, correct me if I'm wrong, because clearly I am prone to that. But you can't do, they don't have like custom 1v1 maps that are not gargantuan.
No, they don't.
Yeah, I played 1v1 with John in Splatoon 1 for our Pretendo video a long time ago, and I could barely find him. He found me, but I could not find him for the most part, and I struggled with that because I was like, wow, these maps are definitely built for 8 people to be playing on.
Yeah, that'd be kind of cool. They've done some interesting things with Splatoon 3 with like the challenges where you'll have a set period of time where the rules are just wacky. Like maybe there's a bunch of fog, so it's hard to see. Everybody gets slapped with the same weapon or special. Or one that I keep wanting to play, but it's never in rotation when I'm available, is 2v2. They had a 2v2 challenge going for a while.
Oh, nice.
I'd like to see those just be modes that I can select and play when I want to.
Yeah, I think they take feedback from all these things. And I will say that I noticed that things improve incrementally over each entry in the series. And I'm happy for that. I just think that there's still, unlike Smash, I feel like there's so much room to continue to refine the model that it would be a shame if they abandoned it now.
Yeah, we shouldn't abandon the model until we've achieved perfection, and we are still far away from that.
Yeah, I think that's an easy one to agree on. But moving on from Splatoon, I wanted to get just a little bit serious for the end of this episode, or at least before we move on to our mailbag items from the winner's circle, in that, the Nintendo specifically, I mean, games media has been having a rough go of it. I know that it's widely known that the games industry is under pressure and that things aren't ideal. But this week in particular has been really tough for the media side of the industry, which of course Brandon, you and I are part of.
Yeah.
And folks, first off, I want to allay any fears. People have asked if GVG is closing. We're not. We just aren't. We're not going anywhere. GVG is fine. But that's not true of the rest of the industry. And we've seen some pretty high profile closures just this week. Game Informer got shut down seemingly just out of nowhere. Like GameStop didn't tell any of their editors or employees that this was happening until it happened. What's Good Games just announced today that they are in their final season. They are slated to cease operation at the end of September. And of course, Brandon, you and I have both worked in varying capacities at Game Explain, which just announced that they were letting go of their permanent workforce, being Joey and Triss. I've spoken a lot to Triss over the years. I consider them a friend, and I wish them all the best. But yeah, it's been kind of a rough time.
Yeah, I have written a lot of tweets that I have not published. Just being frustrated at the state of the business. Like, I hate seeing so many people lose their jobs in a industry that is largely supposed to be about having fun. It's very disheartening in a lot of ways. And I mean, like you said, GVG is certainly fine. We're not in any danger or anything. But there's a part of me, there's that little voice in the back of my head that's saying, hey man, this sucks. you gotta have a backup plan or something. I know we're not in any danger, but like, am I wrong in thinking that? Like, it's just a natural response.
No, I certainly don't think so. For those of you that maybe aren't too familiar with our setup, for folks like Brandon and I, GVG is something we want to turn into our full-time career one of these days. But I have a separate job. Brandon does various separate jobs right now.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely a concern that, what happens if this completely dries up. Being a YouTube driven business, we are at the mercy of how many views YouTube brings our way, how many people get, eyes on the content we're making. That's why the Weekend in Nintendo is everywhere. We're on every podcast service. We're on YouTube. We push it to Patreon so that as many folks as possible get access to this at least. But with the content we make that's solely on YouTube, we're at the mercy of the algorithm, and the algorithm works like nobody fully understands it. So we don't know if a video is going to be shown to 10% of our subscribers, 100%, or millions of people outside of that group on occasion. And it can be scary when you talk about, people's livelihoods being on the line. And certainly, I don't know, and I want to be clear, I don't know why the folks at What's Good are shutting down. They didn't make any specific mention of reasoning. Game Explain was very clear that it was softening revenue. And of course, when a corporate entity like GameStop shutters something like Game Informer, you have to imagine that they viewed it as a line item on a spreadsheet that was not making what they wanted it to make. Whether that, and that's, to be clear, I'm not giving GameStop any credit here. What they did was awful. They shouldn't have done that. And I'm not saying, but I'm saying someone somewhere decided that it wasn't worth the investment they were putting in. They were wrong, but that's kind of assuming that's what happened. It is terrifying though to think of the fact that your livelihood could be at the mercy of an algorithm that doesn't know you, that doesn't know how much work you put into what you put out, and just decides based on a very mysterious set of equations whether they're going to let people see what you've been working on. That's scary.
If you're out there listening to this and you've never like uploaded to YouTube, or you've never, made money on YouTube or done anything of that sort, there's a lot of pressure when you hit that upload button every single time. the amount of pressure you feel is absolutely immense. Because not only, at least in the case of something like GVG or a Game Explain, or maybe even a Game Informer in this case, when you hit upload, it's not just you that you have to worry about. You know, Here, I have 5 other people I have to worry about when I upload. So if something doesn't hit or it doesn't make money, I'm like, oh no, I'm hurting other people.
Yeah, it's a weird thing too, because a lot of our assumptions, and that's what they are, assumptions about
Yeah.
how the whole thing works, is based on what we hear from other folks, right? It's not YouTube coming down and saying, hey, if you do poorly on this video, then the next video is also going to do poorly because we're not going to recommend it. It's something we think. It's something we've heard other YouTubers tell us, and something that's kind of generally accepted. But nobody from YouTube or Google has ever come down and said, yeah, that is definitely how it works. It's just something we've all kind of noticed over time. And what people are noticing right now is that views on gaming content seem to be down. Like, they're just kind of down. And, I think we're in an interesting period where a lot of YouTube focused outlets are trying to figure out what brings them up. Like, what is it that the algorithm wants right now? Because there were definitely periods where, okay, they want longer essay form style videos, an hour plus, and they'll recommend those. And then there was definitely a period where they wanted every YouTuber making shorts, and you'd get more subscribers and more recommendations if you constantly uploaded shorts. And it's a moving target. It's a shell game. And I think right now is a period where something has changed and everybody's trying to figure out what that is. But I do want to just say, my heart goes out to folks that have been impacted, whether you're at Game Informer, whether you're at What's Good, or whether you're at Game Explain. Like, no matter where you are, if you just found yourself out of a job, I just want you to know that, I feel for you. I've been in your position, and I truly hope that your talents are recognized wherever you may go in the future. Again, I don't know what the situation is with What's Good, but I love those folks, and I know that they're all going to do great, whatever they go on to do. I'm sure they have things lined up that they're excited to get working on.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I also know what it feels like to be impacted by unexpected layoffs in the game industry, no less. I worked at an agency that went belly up in an afternoon, and then I lost my job. It's I think for me, what's more worrying, even more so than just like the YouTube landscape for gaming content, is just the game industry holistically, because we are seeing a lot of layoffs in the journalistic side of the industry, but also just in the development industry, even more so. And it seems to be spreading to all branches of this entire thing that we all love, and it's very, very unsettling.
Yeah, it's no secret that the games industry has been prone to layoffs, and it's been happening pretty much every week. You see somebody who has been displaced and is looking for work now, and you see the retweets from people that have worked with them talking about how wonderful and talented and amazing these people are. And I don't doubt any of those things. It's just amazing to me that we find this industry that is making money hand over fist somehow can't keep the people who make them the products that make them the money they they enjoy so much. And I just have to say, I see efforts to unionize, efforts to do better by the people who make the products we enjoy, and I support all of that 100%. I'm very hopeful that we'll reach a point where layoffs are the exception rather than the norm. I can understand in the case that a company runs out of funds, runs out of money, that they're unable to keep their lights on. But when I see executives pulling in 7, 8, 9-figure bonuses, I have to wonder. Well, maybe not 9 figures. I maybe went far with that, but 7 and 8-figure bonuses. I have to wonder why that couldn't be used to save somebody who's making maybe a low 6-figure income, or somebody who's making a high 6-figure income. When you're talking about people who are getting, millions, if not tens of millions a year, you could have saved some of those folks you laid off. But there's a problem in this industry, and I hope that the louder we get about it, the more is done to fix it.
It it would certainly be nice if there was some way to unionize as YouTubers on the platform, just for some protections there. Because it is a different beast than the game development industry itself. Uh, but yeah, I certainly want to see things turn around for everyone because this is not fun to watch.
No, absolutely not. But I do have to give credit where it's due because we are on a Nintendo podcast, and as sad as these things are, as horrible as it is to see media contracting and certainly game developers and publishers laying off talented staff, Nintendo doesn't really do that. And I'm very happy that I can be on a podcast talking about a company that doesn't engage in this practice, seemingly at all. And that is a really nice thing about Nintendo is that they work very hard to even in the Wii U era to keep their staff their staff.
I certainly hope we don't wake up tomorrow and find out that we're gonna eat crow. But
Right.
yeah, I agree. It is nice to not see that happen all the time with like Nintendo themselves.
Yeah, I mean that's not to downplay the problem in the industry, but it is
Sure.
nice to know that Nintendo, one of the biggest names in the industry, who has very publicly gone through very rough periods in their own business, has not engaged in this. But with that said, let's try to turn the mood around a little bit before we close out today's episode. Let's bring the vibes back to some level of goodness. We have mailbag items from our Winner's Circle. And if you don't know, you can join our Winner's Circle at patreon.com/gvgaming for as little as $5 a month. Gets you access to our Discord, gets you access to our Winner's Circle exclusive channel within that Discord, and lets you submit mailbag items like the ones Brandon is about to show us right now.
So the first one comes from Azran127 asking which of John's top 50 Wii games that doesn't already have a Switch port do you want to see come to Switch or its successor?
Ooh.
Also, if you haven't watched John's top 50 Wii games video, set aside an hour, pop some popcorn, and enjoy.
Yeah, I do have to say I'm consistently impressed by how many physical Wii games that man has. I had to sell off my collection years ago, and watching the bits of that video where he pans across like all his games laid out just wounded me. I want them back so bad.
Easy one for me. First game that came to mind is Monster Hunter Tri. Uh, I'm a big Monster Hunter fan, but they don't tend to re-release their games. One of the things that bugs me about the series is that once a generation or a game goes offline, that's just kind of the end of its story. There's no more online. In the case of a game like Monster Hunter Tri, there's content you can only play in multiplayer that it's completely cut off to you. You just can't engage with it anymore. And I hate that.
That's a massive shame. I actually have two games on here, and I'm going to just list them because I can't decide which one should have a Switch port over the other because they're wildly different games. But I'm going to mention one of the first games John puts up in that video. I think it's ranked like 48, and that is Fragile. It was made by Bandai Namco. It is like a light survival horror type of game, but it has like really, it plays with themes of loneliness and you're in this post-apocalypse where you're kind of like the only person and you're exploring and you see all these kind of scary supernatural things, but at the end it's a game that explores these like kind of depressive emotional themes about loneliness and isolation, and I remember it resonating very strongly with me when I played it. There were moments where it just made me incredibly sad, and I know that doesn't sound fun, but there's something to be said for games that can stir emotion within you. Especially when presented in like a non-realistic setting. So I recommend if you've never played it, play it. It should definitely be on Switch. I'm sad that it isn't. But completely tonally different is Mad World. I
Heck yeah.
love that game. It is beautiful and stunning and violent
And
and
funny.
funny. Yeah, it's just a game that captures a lot of like the silliness that makes games worth playing. Like, you can take something that's big and gory and nasty and, it's fun in the way that older Mortal Kombat games, well, hell, the way modern Mortal Kombat games were. It's not as visceral and upsetting at moments as Mortal Kombat can be. But there's something to be said about you're beating up a guy and there's like a train coming and you just throw him on the tracks, or you can just slam a guy's head into a wall because it's all black and white, and then the blood is the only thing with color. And it's just this stylistic romp that I love so much, and I've been dying for it to get a port to a modern system for so long because it's just trapped on the Wii, and it would be so much fun to play literally anywhere else.
Yeah, I love that game. It leans into its own absurdity. And if you played it on Switch, I think they could have a lot of fun with the HD Rumble.
Oh,
With the
absolutely.
chainsaw.
Oh, now I just want to play that game again. I need to play that game again.
Yeah, it's not a game I've played in a long time. In fact, I didn't even get it until the Wii U era because
Oh, wow.
I was a young lad. I didn't have a
That's
job.
fair.
But once I got a job, that was one of the first games I picked up. Yeah, I'd definitely love to see it get a re-release. People need to know that that game exists because I don't think it's too well known in today's age. Not as much
No,
as it
yeah.
was back then.
Definitely a hidden gem now. I think here in the States it was published by Sega. I could be wrong about that, but fantastic game. Definitely worth picking up. Definitely worth playing. Heavily regret selling it when I was broke a long time ago.
I just checked. Yes, it was Sega, but developed by Platinum.
Okay. I was going to say, I remember the Sega logo being on the package. But thank you, Azran, for the question. You should, I'll echo what Brandon is saying. Go watch John's video. Set aside an hour. It's absolutely worth it. You'll see a bunch of games you probably never heard of because it's not just Mario Galaxy and Skyward Sword and games we all know about. There's a lot of smaller games there that people have likely forgotten about over the years.
And then finally, we have a question from Becca's asking, I thought very cynically about the chances of mainline Pokemon games showing up on NSO. Do you think with so many Pokemon side games showing up, like Mystery Dungeon, Red Rescue Team, that we have a chance of mainline with Pokemon home integration?
Pokemon home integration is what makes this one tough for me because NSO doesn't do a whole lot to modify the games that are on there. It's generally just a ROM dump with added online multiplayer. So I don't know that they would go through the level of effort required on NSO to add something like home integration because that's a pretty big deal to add to an emulator. Whereas if they were going to go that route, I would see them maybe repackaging those games as like new releases on the Switch. Not saying they'd remake them, but they would release them as like a separate eShop or physical game that has that integration baked in.
I mean, that's what they did with the 3DS versions.
Yep.
So I could definitely see them doing that here. I know Pokemon fans would probably want it to have home integration. That's not something that's super important to me. Like, ideally, they would just be NSO drops with the ability to battle and trade using NSO's built-in online features. Because I don't really want to spend $10 to buy Pokemon Yellow for the third time, but that's just me. If they did release them and then added home integration, that's cool. It would be cool to take those Pokemon into modern day and say like, hey, look, I raised this up from a Game Boy game.
Yeah, I think that it's a really interesting idea, and I say that because I would love, like you said, to be able to take Gen 1 Pokemon all the way through every generation. I think that would be the one thing you could do to get me to replay every mainline Pokemon game. Just to see like, oh, I took my Pokemon from Red over to Gold and Silver, and then I took them, generation by generation through all these games thanks to them getting re-released with home integration. But I'm more on your side, Brandon, in that I'd rather these be NSO drops. And that's where I believe they'll end up. I think that Nintendo is likely very closely monitoring their subscription levels for NSO. And when they see that they start to flag to a significant enough degree, they'll be like, guess what? Here's Pokemon. Renew your subs. Because that is definitely exactly the type of game that would get people to come back if they'd let it lapse. Like, the amount of folks that would come back if they just suddenly started dropping Pokemon, like mainline Pokemon on NSO, I think would be huge.
I think if I were to ask for any additional feature, if they were to come to NSO, and they have done this in the past, not a ton, but like you have games like, was it Kirby Tilt and Tumble, where they added gyro support with Pro Controller so that you could play that game. So I could see them making a case to do this, but I would love it if they would allow you to trade Pokemon between your own games. Like, let me load up both ROMs at the same time and trade between them, just because otherwise there's no way to do it other than sending it to someone else who then sends it back to you. I don't want to do that.
That's true. They could also do like a companion app where you just open that on your Switch and it reads both game saves and moves them for you or something.
That could be the Pokemon Home.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the question, Becca's. I want to see Pokemon come to NSO. I think they'll do it eventually. I think they're just waiting for the right time to drop them, but I doubt they're going to do home integration. I think it's just going to be a basic ROM dump unless they go the route of charging us for them again, which I really, really don't want them to do. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Week in Nintendo, episode 5. Thank you all so much for watching or listening. Just a reminder, this goes live on both YouTube and podcast services everywhere, Saturdays at 9 a.m. Pacific if you want to keep up with the latest. And if you'd like to get it early, patreon.com/gvgaming, join our winner's circle, get each episode a full 24 hours early, Fridays at 9 a.m. Pacific. Thanks again to my co-host Brandon for helping me out with this episode. I hope you guys are happy, safe, and healthy wherever you are, and we'll see you next week. Until then, bye.